Thank you, Rajat. We will now shift gears. We've heard the problems, the possibilities, the need for conversations and bringing them together, the change in the global environment. The next set of conversations will be with grounded practitioners. How have they been negotiating? How have they been taking this process or tool, this possibility forward? I'd first like to have Mulumba come in, because Mulumba is also a lawyer. He uses the law as well as does advocacy and mobilization. So Mulumba, how do you see the challenges of community engagement to bring them into the use of human rights possibilities, to bring them into the governance process? You do a whole range of activities from research to petitioning. How do you get communities to become active agents in this entire process?
Thank you so much. Such a great pleasure being here. And I want to thank the first two speakers that have framed issues in a very empowering way for me, that will be talking about the national level stuff. But I also want to, first of all, talk about two things which I think are important in terms of framing national level accountability. Jonathan made a very good observation on things that have been happening lately, but I think we need to go back a little more on where the problems actually started from. And my colleague tried to indicate some of these. You know, the departure from the original understanding of systems building towards today's approaches of not just systems building, but tackling problems. I think, as the late David has been emphasizing over time, our problems started from a shift away from a comprehensive approach to health systems building. You know, the principles of Almata, the principles of the Ottawa Charter, which all talk about systems building. And you know, the thinking then was that if systems are built, then you're able to tackle the things, and the kind of accountability that you would be envisaging is a bit different. So we were convinced that, you know, a holistic approach does not make economic sense. And at that time, the argument was to actually solve the global crisis, economic crisis. So an approach that envisages tackling things that make economic sense began to set in. So we moved away from systems building to now problem solving. And the problem solving had to make economic sense. And this led us into marketization. The marketization, I think, for me, has led to two fundamental things that we cannot forget and do not need to forget. The first point is around a very disempowered state. The states were completely looked at as, you know, entities that can't deliver, entities that cannot make things happen. And therefore, for practitioners, we begin to see that even holding the state accountable, sometimes you cannot get the results that you want. The states, not just at the national level, but also at the global level, are supposed to be the leads in terms of agenda setting. But when you look at what's happening today, the states have lost that. You know, they will comfortably tell you that the resources are not there for us to be able to handle socio-economic issues and therefore handle their human rights obligations. And I think that's a problem. You will see it at WHO. Who is funding WHO, which is, you know, in terms of health, where you would classically see the role of the state. I think I have been reading around, and they were making mention that when you look at the funding of WHO, I think if you combine Germany and Japan, the money that they give is much less than what Bill and Melinda Gates is giving. So you begin to question who is setting the agenda of health. And in terms of accountability, who will you be holding accountable? And who will be having the power in these dynamics? The state lost all the ownership of property, all the leadership on essential services. In the country where I come from in Uganda, The state doesn't give citizens water. It came up with a private, arrangement where water is provided to citizens. The state does not give electricity to citizens. It got a private entity from South Africa that is distributing electricity, and it determines where the electricity is going. The state has no role whatsoever in transportation. Now, these are key essential issues that we are talking about that would deliver health to citizens. So if the state has moved out of these obligations, it becomes extremely difficult. And it also changes the dynamics of accountability on who is going to be holding who accountable. The core role of the state would actually be to regulate. What we are seeing is that we still have situations in a country where I come from and several other countries in the region in Africa where the state is only regularizing the major player who is the private sector. It's not regulating, it's regularizing. A classic example of Uganda where I come from, it is very rare to have a sector which has a law, a policy, and a strategy for implementation. We have seen that for the PPPs, public-private partnerships, around the last 3 or so years, we have consistently developed a legislation on that. We have developed a policy on it and a strategy for implementation. This has not happened in any sector. You'll find that a sector has a strategy, but there is no policy. A sector has a law, but there is no, strategy around it, and it becomes a problem. So the first point for me is to actually emphasize that the role of the state has been lost. And therefore, the state has become very disempowered, and for us as practitioners, that's the first point that we need to be noting. The second point is around who is this player now, where the state has left. What we are seeing, not just at the national level, but also at the global level, as I have indicated, someone undefined is in charge of things. He is going to come with their agenda. The person is going to come and define the sort of narratives and policies around SDGs, and therefore we have run into conversations on how commercially we can deliver healthcare, and I was listening to conversations yesterday. All our attention has been taken away from systems building to actually focusing on universal healthcare coverage, and we are not looking at universal healthcare coverage. We have even abandoned that and are focusing on financing for health. I think health financing is important, but financing is just a component. But because the major player benefits much more in a conversation on financing, I think that's where we've run. And therefore, all our accountability is running towards that. I think that's a major, major problem that we need to deal with. We have been made to believe that, rights are now aspirational, rights are now things that cannot be realized, and therefore, if you frame health as a right, it's not something that can be realized because states don't have resources. And we are fighting back. We are spending a lot of time writing articles on the justiciability of the right to health, rather than actually going to the principle, as you have indicated, an implementation of the principle that was envisaged in rights. The principle that was envisaged in rights is on humanity. States were supposed to be guided by the principles of rights to take forward humanity. That conversation has been lost as we speak. We are in a process conversation that are really rights making sense? Should we continue to have a conversation on rights? And all the energy is actually now focused on that, which I think is a problem. Because of the departure on that, we have also moved away from the commitments that were actually created as guidance on how the states are going to be committed. And the conversation is not about the commitments of states in human rights. It's actually conversations that are still focused on whether states can afford these commitments. And I think that's, again, wrong. And we need to move our accountability beyond that sort of understanding. I think the rights framework was also supposed to help us to look at obligations beyond our borders, beyond Uganda, beyond Kenya, beyond India, beyond the countries, such that we begin to look at this humanity cause from a perspective of a global solidarity. Now, we can't reach the conversation on global solidarity because at the national level, we are still struggling to see if these normative frameworks that we have created can be implemented. And I think it's a lost opportunity. We have focused on poverty. All the policies, I think since the 80s, we had the PRSPs, Poverty Reduction Strategy papers. We spent a lot of time training technical people back home to be experts in poverty reduction. You know, poverty is huge. We have poverty in India, we have poverty in Uganda, but some things are beyond poverty. You know, poverty. Our president, my president, has a whole program on poverty alleviation. You know, you may give people wealth, but as long as the other key issues are not solved, this, poverty animal has to be, sometimes looked at and measured as to whether it actually makes sense. So I think there is a huge problem there. I would end by saying and calling upon us as practitioners to go back and revisit the understanding of a state. What's a state? And can our focus actually go back to look at a state that builds system, not a state that is disempowered and a state that is inviting other people to come and perform the obligations. And lastly, I would call upon us to begin thinking around working beyond the borders in which we are, working beyond the isolation that we have and the incapacities that we have in our countries, to begin to think about, a global social contract, a social contract in which we hold states accountable and we say that accountability starts at your level. If you've been able to collect taxes, how have you applied those taxes? You can only move out of, your national level to come to the global to ask when you have actually demonstrated that at the national level the social contract is fulfilled, and then we jump to the next stage of the global social contract. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Moses, for reminding us of the context in which we are situating these debates and demanding the right to health. Before I ask you a follow-on question, I just want to remind everyone to join the conversations by sending us your questions on WhatsApp. The number was flagged early on, and we can flag up again, probably. Yeah, okay, great. There's a +91 in front of that. So, Moses, thank you. I mean, I think you've laid out the context very well. There is a hollowing out of state, and there's an increased trend of marketization and also financialization of health and healthcare. We're seeing increasingly donors, and I've been involved with this study where I'm looking at 5 different donors sending out money to the private sector through financial activities. And blended financing and other innovative mechanisms of financing, where a large part of the public money is going to private sector to increase and extend privatization in healthcare. So against that, the backdrop where we are talking about disempowered states, can you also reflect on some innovative practices or resistance and strategies that have been adopted to enhance transparency in these public-private partnership type of engagement in the health sector, and also holding for-profit sector to account for the impact it is having on health systems?
Thank you so much. First, I think it's a mix of approaches. It would be very difficult for me to say that we can make a distinction between national level interventions and global level interventions. The point I would want to make is that national level interventions lately are very much influenced by global movements. In fact, the decisions at the global level determine what we do at the national level. If you wanted to make any interventions today in Uganda and you do not make mention of the word Sustainable Development Goals, you're not going to be entertained in any office. So, certainly, the first thing is to understand what are these global conversations? What do they mean for us at the national level? So I think innovative approaches should be able to envisage that the interventions are happening both at the global level but also influencing the national level, as a first point. The second point is that we have traditionally had approaches. I work in legal empowerment and social accountability field. I am increasingly realizing that legal empowerment cannot work in isolation of social accountability. Because, social accountability continuously gives evidence upwards. But also, if you overdo social accountability and you're not holding people legally accountable, it's a problem. So, I think the second innovation for me would be to see how do we combine these traditional approaches that we've been having in a way that complements each other, such that we move away from saying, I'm a lawyer and therefore what I understand is legal accountability and I'll focus on that. It will not give result if social accountability is not happening. The third point, I think, for me would be access to information. Our empowerment, our accountability starts with information that we do have. The states are signing agreements, the states are making decisions, but in many cases, we as practitioners have no access to this information. And I come as a legal practitioner, we usually, if you're going to court, there are three approaches. You can argue the law where you do not understand the facts or the facts don't favor you, so you argue the law. But if the law does not favor you and it's the facts that you have, you then zero down on arguing the facts. So the facts then lead you to, you may find a judge who is more lenient. But if both the law and the facts do not favor you, then you are resorted to just arguing. So you just make an argument, a very compelling argument. And I think we as practitioners, let's try to get as much information as possible, such that as lawyers do it, if the situation leads you to just making allegations, make the allegation. Whoever has the information will inevitably bring it. The other the fourth approach is moving beyond fearfulness. Because, civic space is closing everywhere. It's, when I listen to India, when I listen to Uganda, when I listen to Guatemala, everywhere civic space is closing in. How do we force that space to open up beyond, not just within our borders, but also outside the borders, in a very fearless way, to be able to handle things? And then lastly, how do we build movements that are grounded in the principles that we are discussing? Because I think there is a lot of interventions that are happening, but very uncoordinated. We have formed coalitions, but these coalitions are still very specific on the things we are working on. And I usually draw a lot of aspiration from the women movement all over the world. Women movements are movements. They will work on land, they will work on domestic violence, they will work on this and that. But it's a movement. As long as it's an issue to do with women, they will all come together. I think as far as something is to do with accountability, let's not over-focus on our traditional understanding of accountability. Let's begin to help each other. Yesterday I was in a session of patient rights, and I kept thinking in my mind, how do I get these community level people discussing here into the community in Uganda to begin to raise forums, use the terms I was hearing that are very compelling to change, the rights of patients. So movement building, not just at the community level, not just at the national level, but global movements as have been envisaged before. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Moses. You have laid out a lot of principles, and we would like to see some of those principles. How do they reflect in practice? Yesterday, Arunaji talked about the devil in the detail, which is finally working down at the operational level, because that's what people experience in their lives. And who better to give us an idea of how those operational details, you've seen it from both sides of the fence. And my question to you, Soumya, is that, now that you're within the SSAT, looking at it from, governments also get brownie points when they adopt so-called good practices. How do you make these so-called good practices substantive spaces for opening up civic engagement? How do you make them, what does your experience in working with the law, with the government, with communities, your heart in the communities, in terms of expanding civic space, in terms of helping this exercise of citizenship that we have been talking about, making it more substantive and delivering the services that we are also talking about?
Take off from where Mulumba left, which is you need to talk with facts. And I think my own experience of moving from a movement, a social movement like the MKSS to government wasn't easy. The thought that there was a paradigm shift from working outside to working within. But I think what worked in the context of the composite state of Andhra Pradesh was the fact that 2 lines in the law, which I think the MKSS and a whole lot of organizations fought for. In Narega, they fought for just those 2 lines, which is social audits will be done once in 6 months in every Gram Panchayat. Nobody had a clue what a social audit was. Everyone knows from civil society point of view about public audits, Jan Sunwai, but what was social audit? Now, there was one state, a very willing bureaucracy right at the top, and a very willing political space, which was open to considering having a social accountability set up to do social audits. So what started as an experiment, and I was involved in the experiment. I initially stepped in to say, okay, let's see where it goes. The fact that that experiment started in 2006 when the NREGA law was passed and first began to be implemented in the state of Andhra Pradesh and across the country. And now, literally 12 years on, out of which 10 years I've spent as director of the Social Audit Institution, tells me that yes, spaces open up, spaces shrink. There's no doubt about it. Yet, as on date, to be able to carry out a social audit exercise in every single village of a state, making sure that every single rupee that's been spent under Narega is audited by citizens and through facilitators. Again, 90 to 95% of the facilitators in the social audit process are from marginalized communities. I'm very proud to say I follow no roster. 95% of them come from marginalized Dalit families, all of them first generation literate, all of them right there, spunky, ready to question the state. And this is state sponsored. This is something the state is funding, that the state has an obligation towards its citizens to ensure that there is space for people to be able to come and question. We are electing our representatives. And we begin to fear our representatives once they sit in positions of power. They dictate policy, whereas policy should have been ours. We are the ones who are supposed to decide what policy is. Where is the space for that kind of discussion in terms of, even a pre-legislative discussion to say that this is the law we want to bring in, what is the opinion of the citizens? And I feel, unfortunately, one part of citizenship engages, one part feels that whatever Sarkar is doing is fine. And so I think within that space of social accountability, even something like ensuring that there is 0.5% or 1% funding for these social accountability institutions to be set up. I was very conscious when I set up the organization and named it, that I didn't call it only a social audit society. We called it a society for social audit accountability and transparency, because social audit is only one part of a much larger canvas of social accountability and social accountability tools. Also, the fact that the social audit or social accountability principles are not limited to just one set of people or something that's written in terms of saying, okay, the majority says this. What the social accountability exercise actually ensures is that every individual has the right to speak, every individual has the right to be heard. So if you hear, if you come to any of our social accountability, the social audit public hearings, every individual who has a grievance, either in the Gram Sabha or in the public hearing, is given an opportunity to raise a question. Now, if you look at this in the context of health, we've done fantastically well with schemes like the midday meals, with NREGA, with ICDS. With health, I feel somewhere there's been a tentativeness even from government side to engage. But I feel that this is one space that really needs to open up. We really need to push the boundaries. I mean, just looking back, if you've seen in the last year or two, you've had public instances of doctors working in government hospitals being lynched, being pulled out and beaten up by people who are unhappy. Why is that happening? There is so much of a disconnect between citizens and service providers. There is, everything now is IT based. I mean, like you said, you can send your questions through IT. We are told, aap mat aao. Please send us your, if you have a problem with government, just send us a WhatsApp. Send us a message. I would like an interface. Why do I need to resort to something that is completely, impersonal in terms of these IT platforms? And we don't know whether it's a robot that's sitting there and responding or, a person who's responding. So somewhere or the other, I feel that within the social accountability space, working with government for me has been an experience that we've had great times, we've had really bad times, we've had times when we've been seen as, been treated very indifferently, but we haven't been killed. We haven't been maimed, which means none of our facilitators have ever been physically hurt. In fact, government takes responsibility for both the institution and the reports. And the fact that the institution is still today continuing robust, no matter, I've seen 5 governments come and go in one state. I've seen a state bifurcation happening, setting up 2 institutions parallelly so that no one state would be denied the institution. And I've found that at the end of the day, governments also want to look good. They want, social media has this huge power on the way in which governments respond to what a citizen is saying. They don't like negative reports. I mean, that's also partially the reason why the minute you have a social accountability exercise, the first thing they're worried about is, what is the worst that we are going to hear? I mean, there was a time at least 10 years ago when I remember one of my commissioners telling me, I said, it's not going to be very nice. You'll hear a lot of things that are not going to be very pleasant, especially when you're the implementing agency, you might not like it. So he turned around and said, this is for me like an MRI. It tells me I'm investing so much money, so much effort, so much energy into this program. And if at the end of it, what we are getting out of it is not what the optimum that we want, then this is the best possible way for us to be able to address it. So having looked at the way governments have reacted, and if you've, I tend to sit back at times and crib, because when you've seen something really good and you feel you're going through a bad phase, you feel ki kuch nahi hua hai, nothing's happened. But if I start with just 2 lines in a law, giving us the space to set up a social audit institution, the fact that it's an independent institution, in 12 years I've never been asked to replace a report of mine. Whatever report there is goes on to the public domain as is in Telugu or in English. Anybody can access it. There are no restrictions in terms of downloading it. If you look at the fact that 1% funding has been committed by government, central government now, to this particular institution, if you find that there are social audit standards that have been issued by the Ministry of Rural Development in consultation with the Comptroller and Auditor General of this country, if you see the kind of guidelines, the fact that there is a complete interest in the way in which this institution is going to be functioning and the outcomes of these social audits. Now, in fact, the MORD on a regular basis asks, what is the follow-up? What has happened to all the issues that have come to you all? How have you disposed it? Have recoveries happened? Has action been initiated? Have people been terminated? 36,000 people being acted upon in 10 years in one scheme, in the form of fines, in the forms of being removed from their jobs or suspended or disciplinary action being taken against people. That's not a small thing. I mean, even for a state government or for the central government or for citizens who've been involved in this entire exercise, it's something to feel very proud about. And I think there are times when, as civil society activists, we feel that spaces are shrinking, but we've still got one foot through the door. We just need to put our might to push the door wide open, and I am sure we can push it. Last but not least, I feel that we really have reached a point where, and this goes across all schemes, all sectors, we really need a social accountability law. I feel that citizens, the onus of bringing an issue to government is that of the citizen. What is the government's onus to address that particular issue and say, this is going to be time-bound, I'm taking responsibility for it? That can't be the citizens, that has to be governments. And I think that a lot of us feel we already have a lot of laws. But yeah, where the RTI stops with giving you information, social accountability will actually ensure that any action that comes out of that information by citizens will have to be acted upon by government.
Thank you, Soumya. That was really very insightful. And I think my main question to you is, and especially because you've moved from the movement and to being part of the state, from sort of challenging the state to being part of it, I want to interrogate what you mentioned as also having bad times. And just to reflect a bit on what is lost in mainstreaming progressive and citizens' accountability tools like and establishing a social audit institution. What is lost in that process of mainstreaming? Are there particular limitations that you've encountered in pushing this agenda forward?
I think what is lost is that the minute, this again is from personal experience, I presume just from the fact that I work with a state where civil society organizations often look at social audits as now the state's responsibility and not theirs. I feel that it has to be, we have to walk step in step. It can't be two parallel processes where government says we are doing the social audit process and civil society says, government is doing this exercise. I feel that the power of linking civil society to social audits or to any social accountability exercise is extremely important, because at the end of the day, the reports that we churn out also need to be questioned. I can sit here and say very confidently that I would back that report 100%, but I feel that the minute civil society starts looking at these reports, starts questioning, starts following up, saying, asking questions on those social audit reports and about those social audit reports, a lot of difference can be made, even in terms of getting government to respond in terms of follow-up action, but keeping us on our toes. I mean, what's to stop us from tomorrow getting co-opted by government? I mean, if I was a smart politician, I would just ensure that my person sat in the post of the director of social audit, and then everything would just go my way. So civil society cannot and should not wash its hands off. I think that the power of both social audits and public audits need to keep going simultaneously. So for every social audit that a society for social audit does, a parallel accountability exercise should be undertaken by civil society to see whether what we've done or what the report that we've put up is robust, whether it is, it's done the fact checking properly, whether it is honest. And so I think that's been lost. I don't know about other states, but definitely in Andhra and Telangana, I keep, that's one battle I have with all my civil society friends, saying, question us, ask us, look at our reports, make sure that, at the end of the day, we don't become completely complicit with the state in terms of saying, all is well, we've done social audit, it's all clear. So.
Thank you. We cannot outsource social audit to the state. And I think that is, while we mainstream, this outsourcing cannot happen. And without, I think the message is loud and clear, without a social movement owning that process and keeping a constant pressure, in this interrogation, it may become routinized, and that's where I'll use the social movement conversation to talk to Wilson. Wilson, you've been part of a social movement with the most marginalized communities. You're not from the health sector, and that's one of the reasons why we have you here. But health is something which is integral to the well-being of the communities and the movement that you are part of. Do you think social audits, the issues of transparency, actually hold a promise a promise for a better life, a realization of rights, their fundamental well-being, as a mechanism which also works for the Safai Karmacharis. Give us a reality check.
See, I apologize that I came late. Then second is about this is an area where we are talking about the health, and we also tend to think that we are not part of the health but no citizen can be out of the health sector. Without the health sector, then there is nothing any sector. Every sector is linked with the health. Then second is accountability. So the problem here, when you take the context of India, so India and Indian civil society and Indian government here, the accountability in the sense it is an upward accountability. So you are accountable to the person who is sitting on the top. So we don't have anywhere even just a small iota of the understanding that we are accountable to our citizens. That we don't have, unfortunately, in the governance. And there may be one or two places or some institutions that is like a paradise somewhere here or there. That has not lost after the Milton. The paradises are there, here are there in certain departments. I do agree for that. But in all the sectors, there is no accountability as such. I am not delivering this to my citizen, my fellow human being, and I am accountable for that. That understanding I have not seen in the governance in India. Because I am also almost like a 35 years with mostly working with the government. Government always think that I am against the government. Of course, that is their stand. I have no problem. Because the government think that when somebody is starting questioning, they think that questioning is an against. That is a misunderstanding, misconcept that we cannot help. We have to make the whole governance to understand that the questioning is also part of actually to make the things on the possible way to take it for. That is, we are struggling. From S.R. Shankaran is a retired IAS officer who passed in 2010. I worked with him almost like 18 years. So there I have seen very closely with the IAS officers and particularly the sector, how they are thinking about the people and all. So if you take the state and even the private sector and the global institutions, all three together also, or separate ways, how they are accountable, what are they actually. The private sector first I will take. Private sector always think that they can replace the government and we can do the things. That is a danger for the most marginalized sections in the society. I am coming and I am representing, I am also from the same manual scavenging community, so I know actually what are our requirements. I am not even using the word the rights. Of course, we do have a rights, there is no doubt, but requirements as sanitation workers. So many private sector institutions now, they come within a cooperative society, this, and they introduce a contract labor, and they, see, that's what I want. You want to provide the health and the sanitation facilities to the right to sanitation for other citizens, but at the same time you are violating the rights of the people who are providing the sanitation. So we go in the one direction. We don't see that what are the implications on the marginalized. I think that this symposium here, we have to make a very clear eye or the view how we are suppressing, oppressing and violating the rights of the most marginalized societies, communities across the globe. So that angle we are not taking. We are thinking how do we reach? We want to construct the toilets. Oh, construct toilet. All the ministries construct. And you will not see that whether those things are required for them or not, number one. Number two, who are going to clean all those things? You never see that. And you claim that you have the double, twin pit, triple or 4 pits for the one toilet. You can claim. But in the reality, everybody knows in the country that we don't have many places, even a 1 pit for the one toilet. Please try to understand. Most of the toilets are connected with the drains and all. So this is the fact. But you construct and you say that we are doing. Then you are perpetuating again the manual scavenging. Somebody has to come and clean that. And there the people are dying. You have not even have a single word about the people died in the sewer line and septic. This is not the small number I am talking about. If you have any one number, 30, 40 people died here or there, it becomes a national issue. 1,870 citizens died in this country in the sewer line and septic tank. It is not even an issue for the any upper level. So you don't talk about that. So you talk about the rights of someone, you are ultimately you are violating the rights of others and you are taking away the life. It's not just right. Article 21 Indian Constitution says right to live life with the dignity. But the manual scavenger, sewage sanitation worker, where is the right? And another thing is, when you are constructing and doing all these things, you develop a value that open defecation free. Who brought this? You know that this is an international agenda. Open defecation free, banana, wo karo, ye karo. So, okay, you also adapt that. I have no problem. But the thing is, you have to study your local situation, where you have to do that. And you declare 98% of India is the open defecation free today. But the same country, 1.6 lakh women still they are carrying the human excreta in the dry latrine. So where is the point of having the dry latrine and declaring the open defecation? What is this? For whom we are declaring? So my question is, we are not accountable to the women who is cleaning the shit after 75 years of independence. So that question you don't talk about. So who actually, why they have to clean the shit even today? Is there any one reason to say that? Then second is, to achieve that, you develop that nobody should defecate open. Why somebody will come and defecate open if they have the facility to use the toilet with the privacy? 90 lakhs are staying in the roads and the streets, homeless. So where they will go? So you have no public toilet system facility anywhere. And you have the toilet system in the slums. How? It is the, actually you have to pay and use. In India Habitat Center, we don't pay the toilet charges. You go use and flush and come back where we have afford to pay the money. But where the slum, where the people cannot pay, there you introduce 5 rupees, 2 rupees or 5 rupees. So how they will pay and use? So you don't think anything. And another is to achieve this, all these things. You develop that nobody should anywhere. And in Shivpuri in Madhya Pradesh, somebody came and they said that there are the 2 children who are defecating outside. In that name, they came and they killed. And you can use the word lynching or you don't want to use the word lynching. But literally you killed 2 children in Shivpuri. For what? They are polluting the place. But what is the truth? The people, the children who died both are from the Balmiki community, scheduled caste. And who cleaned this country? The people who cleaned 5,000 years this great country, and those children, 2 children, the same community, 2 children, in the name of the clean, you are coming and killing. This is the value. So what are the actually where we are making the mistakes? That we have to take as a stock. We don't talk anything. We want to just achieve target. Targets are not for the UN. Targets are not for somebody, other international agencies. International agencies must start thinking fast. In implementation, there should not be any human rights violations. State never going to talk about the human rights. The international agent. Second, private sector, they have to facilitate the process of the welfare state. It is not alternative to the state. And the state must actually turn back and look actually how do we actually accountable to our own citizens, particularly the marginalized, voiceless.
Thank you, Wilson, for helpfully reminding us of bringing back the discussions and quite firmly embedding it in the issues of marginality and the rights and violations that the marginalized are experiencing. I think I just want to unpack that notion of marginality a little bit more, and I want to understand, so you clearly alluded to the issue of caste. I also want to understand how the movement has, and to what extent the movement has addressed the intersections of the social locations of people who are in the manual scavenging. To what extent have women's voices been part of the movement, and how the strategy have addressed the intersections of caste, of gender, of class, and other issues. So if you could just reflect a bit on that.
See, India is a very, it is a, in whole world, there are certain kind of discriminations in the name of certain things. Maybe race, maybe something else. India has another peculiar is the caste. We cannot ignore the caste. And you do some kind of a work here. Even development or sanitation, health, water, whatever, you touch even the wind or anything, you have to address and you have to look from the view of the caste and of course patriarchy. They both are very, very strong in Indian society, and without touching that. And as in a Safai Karmachari Andolan, this movement mobilizes with women only mostly, and all of them are marginalized, and particularly Dalits and the scheduled caste. There is no doubt at all. And the judiciary also in the country, they don't look into the lens of the caste and the gender. They pass the orders and all. When they are also now wanted to actually review the act, so review and the amendments of the act on the basis of how we can escape from the clauses in the act. It is not actually bringing the more rights perspective. No, now you think that the progressiveness. Now our progressiveness is actually how can we wash our hands? We have learned from the WASH program maybe, but we washed our hands from the accountability. So this is a thing which is everywhere. So this thing is actually, so we have to put these two parameters, the caste and the gender, very clearly in everywhere. And health also, I want to make one point here. We do work in the 10 slums in Patna Municipal Corporation, with the Patna Municipal Corporation and United Nations Population Fund, along with them, the group of the people are working. There, actually the health is a major focus in doing this. Child marriages, never enrolled in the schools, and all these are almost like 80%. So it is, we are talking about the capital city. And the health facilities, the municipal corporation or the government supposed to provide, like one ambulance. It is taking 9 months, still there is no ambulance. So we do make a big plans, but we are unable to actually deliver even a small things which can provide the minimum basic amenities to the citizens.
Thank you so much, Wilson. I'm doing a rethink about what I thought would be a more democratic process. Either we have been extremely enthralled with what's the conversation here, or we have been reluctant to ask questions, because we have not received a single question. Oh goodness! Okay, social media, please, technology, we need, like every time and everywhere, technology has huge birthing problems. So I think we'll have to. Huh? Okay, I'm so sorry, but I think we've had a very, very stimulating panel. It's come at the issue of citizenship, it's come at the issue of governance, it's come at the issue of accountability from very, very distinctive points of view. And I don't want to do any kind of summary, because that would be disrespectful in many ways. What I would like all of you is to hold these questions, hold these thoughts during the day. Because what is important is there have been deep interrogation and also spaces for hope. And we do, as we talked about yesterday, we are after all professionals of hope. So without that hope, we would be just cynical, we would not be here. So holding on to those questions, but holding on even stronger to the hope and the issues that have been flagged by all our 5 panelists here, I do hope you go through the rest of the day and the symposium and are able to get deeper answers, more meaningful insights for yourself and together. I think the important point is when we talk with marginalized communities, it has to be solidarity, solidarity, solidarity. Thank you all, and let's now have tea. Sorry for that move up on technology.
I didn't used to look any better. Thank you.
Not to worry about
Hello everyone. Can I have your attention for a minute, please? We have some admin announcements. So those of you